Delta 2706, wind calm, runway 1 left, clear for takeoff.
Runway 1 left, clear for takeoff, Delta 2706.
Delta 1003 is traffic, no factor, only 1 left, you clear to land, wind calm.
Clear to land, 1 left, Southwest 1003.
And 843 Echo, select you make the 180 on the runway, and then exit at Juliet.
Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are heading out for some more tri-jet action, this time in the FlightSim Studio's Boeing 727-200 freighter. The add-on obviously released a little while ago, and I must admit, given how far behind the curve I was on this one, I was in two minds about whether or not to actually take a look at the aircraft. I am certainly glad that I did though. The 727 is not only great fun, but I would argue has the potential to become one of the best vintage jets available within the sim. Today's video is going to be a full review of the add-on, although one very important point to note here before we get started. The livery featured here during the flight is not included with the package, and indeed a passenger variant of the 727 is not currently included with the product. This beautiful American Airlines livery comes courtesy of Greg P. Zimmer. It's available freely over on FlightSim.to, and I thought we'd just mix things up a bit since you've most likely seen a lot of freight ops with the add-on at this point. For our flight today, we are going to be recreating the final flight of an American Airlines 727, operating the jet from Tampa back home to Miami. The flight took place on the 30th of April 2002. Our flight number today is American 765. We have 153 passengers on board the jet. This short sector has us in the air for approximately 40 minutes, cruising at flight level 230 and uploading some 21,000 pounds of Jet A. It's a beautiful day for flying here in Florida, so let's kick the tyres and light the fires of the 727 one last time. As always, I really hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. Okay, so today then we find ourselves in the cockpit of FlightSim Studio's Boeing 727 freighter. As discussed, we are currently on the ground stand 74 here in Tampa, and we're going to be taking the jet on its final voyage back towards Miami. A little bit unusual here today. As you can see, we are currently situated at the flight engineer's station. We're going to be working our way through all of his checks and flows initially, and then we'll move over into the left-hand seat here ahead of the start. So for the cockpit preparation checklist, the part brake is set, radio master switches are both selected on. The left and right AC packs are both selected off. The battery master is on and guarded. For the DC meter here, we'll come through to battery. We're looking for a minimum of 22 volts, currently showing 24. The central power selector set through to the APU. AC meter as well set there through to the APU. Bus tie breakers are closed. APU field switch is closed. We'll carry out an APU fire test. And we can hit reset. And we'll just do that twice to make sure we have the APU starter circuit energized. So we can now fire up the APU itself. And as you'll notice here during the start as well, when we electrically power the aircraft, really nice sounds overall on the FSS 727. They've certainly done a great job of making the aircraft feel very immersive. So just keeping a good eye here on the APU exhaust temperature. And we do now have a good start, so we'll close up the APU generator circuit. And as you can see, we now have the jet electrically powered. So continuing on with our checklist for the pressurization system, the mode selector is set through to auto. Flight ground switch is set through to ground. For the flight altitude, quite a low level for us here today. We're going up to flight level 230. And as you can see, 230 gives us a cabin altitude there of 500 feet.
Delta 2531, contact departure, see ya.
That's just going to take a little bit of time for us to set. And we have 500 feet set. For the landing altitude, sea level over in Miami, so we'll set 0. So the pressurization is set. For the air temperature selector, that is set through to main supply. APU bleed is selected on. AC packs, we'll now take both of the packs on. And for the left and right pack cooling doors, we'll set those all the way through to fully open, which again is just going to take a little bit of time.
Country 367 Tampa Tower, runway 1 left, clear to land.
So all the way through to fully open there on the left. Just manually setting the pack cooling doors for now, but later on the flight engineer will actually take care of those for us. And we have fully open there on the right. Cargo heat outflow switch is set through to normal. We'll take the gasper fan on here as well. Oxygen pressures are checked. Passenger oxygen switch is set through to normal. Auto pack trip switch is set through to cutout. Zone temperature control, we have auto there on the left. We'll do the same here on the right.
South Sydney 26, contact departure.
There we have auto selected there on both sides. Galley power will take on, both for zones 1 and 2, 3 and 4. For the DC meter again, just checking the battery voltage and no draw there as well now on the battery with the APU powering the aircraft. We'll check the essential transformer rectifier and as well TR1 and TR2, and just bring the switch for now back into the essential TR position. For the fuel quantities, we've got about 9,000 pounds there in the left, same in the centre and same on the right. So 27,000 pounds on board the jet. Our flight plan had about 12,500 kilos, so that checks. Just check the indications here as well, so watching the needles roll back. And then of course the gauges should return to their previous positions. So 9,000 in the left, 9,000 in the centre.
Order departure, Southwest 1526.
And again expecting to see 9,000 here on the right, which we have. Fuel shut-off switches are all set through to open. For the hydraulics, System A switches are selected on. The ground interconnect switch will set through to open. And the System B elect pump switches here will take on. CSD oil cooler is set through to normal. We'll take 1 boost pump here per tank. So 1 on the left, 1 on the centre and 1 on the right for now. In terms of the fuel loading, as we've already discussed, the fuel is equally loaded between all 3 tanks. So we'll leave the cross feed to number 2 open, and we can close up here the cross feed for number 1 and number 3. Back to the hydraulics panel, the hydraulic pressures are checked. We've got 3,000 there on both the left and the right system. So the ground interconnect switch can go back through to closed. We should see the pressure fall off here on System A, which we do. And for System B now, we'll take the Elect 2 pump off. And that is it in terms of our initial setup. So we'll now move, as I say, over to the commander seat, and we'll continue on with the before start checklist. Okay, so we are now comfortably sat down here in the left-hand seat, continuing on with the cockpit preparation. The altimeters, we have a QNH today of 2974, that's set on the primary, as well on the standby, and as well there on the right. For the standby attitude indicator, just set that up. And that is checked. Anti-skid switch is selected on. Auto brake will set through to RTO. We'll carry out a stall warning.
Foxtrot 7, Tampa Tower, 1 right, line up and wait.
And the test is good. We'll do the same here as well for the fire warning. So good indications. We'll check the bell cutouts. And the test is complete. The emergency exit lights are set through to armed. Pneumatic brake lever is selected off. Your damper switches are both on and guarded. We can now align the INS, so we'll come down to the unit, we'll set that through to standby. We'll come onto the position page, and we'll enter our present position, so stand 74 here at Tampa is north 2758.7. We can insert that, and west 082. 32.3. Again, we'll hit insert. So the present position is checked, that is accurate. We'll set the unit now through to align. And we'll come onto the status page. That'll give us our countdown here and accuracy in terms of the time to align. For the rest of the checks, the passenger signs are selected on. We'll do the same here as well for the window heats. The initial altitude for the departure here today is going to be 6,000 feet. So we'll pre-select that. We have 6,000. The flight instruments, in terms of the departure, the heading is going to be 203. We'll set that as well here on the course. So just using my hardware to slew the course bar, it's a little bit quicker.
Falcon 777, runway 1 right, line up and wait.
Unfortunately, for whatever reason, my hardware doesn't seem to work with the heading bug, so we'll just set that manually. We'll brief out the departure in just a moment's time, but essentially it's just going to be a radar departure off on a heading of 203, initially climbing up to 6,000 feet. Later on we'll track out towards the Saratoga VOR. And we'll tune that up in just a moment's time. So we've got 203 on the course, 203 on the heading bug. For the radios, again, the Saratoga VOR, that's on a frequency of 117.0. So I'll set that on my side. It's 117.0. And we'll do the same here as well on the right. And 117.
Fuel 985, contact departure, have a super awesome day.
Decimal 0. So instruments and radios are set. The autopilot is disengaged. Flight director motor selector will come through to heading, and we'll set 15 degrees up here on the pitch for the departure initially. The flight director altitude hold switch is selected off. Once again for the course, 203 there as well on the heading bug. Transponder is set through to standby, squawking 2000. For the trim, nice little feature here, as you all have noticed already and probably have seen in other videos. We do have a clipboard as opposed to an EFB available with the 727, which is a really nice touch. It fits in very well with the aircraft. We'll just very briefly run through that. So for the aircraft page, setting the aircraft state, the doors, the panel state, various aircraft options. The pre-flight page is your weights and fuel. We've already set that up. Takeoff page is a takeoff performance calculator. The flight page is a top of descent calculator. And the landing page, of course, a landing data calculator. Navigraph charts are also integrated into the onboard clipboard, which is really nice. They work very well, although, that being said, I have had a couple of issues in terms of using the charts. The aircraft actually bugs out there afterwards and I can't click anything in the cockpit. But once that bug is fixed up, the charts are integrated very well here into the clipboard. So for the takeoff out of Tampa, it's going to be runway 19 right. And it's going to be a flaps 5 departure. The weather data there is accurate. As you can see, you can also import that here into the calculator. So that's already calculated the weight for us. We need a minimum takeoff run available of 2,000 meters or just above. Our max takeoff weight 85 tons. So for today's conditions, it's giving us a takeoff EPA of 1.98, takeoff trim of 3.25, and V speeds there, V1 142, VR 142, V2 150. So we'll set the EPA and the trims. We'll set here as well the speed bugs. In terms of the trim then, looking for 3.25, that is checked. The bugs are checked both there for the airspeed indicator and as well there for the EPA. So that's it in terms of the initial setup. We can now come down to the INS and we'll begin programming in here our waypoints for the flight. So we'll come back to the waypoint page. Waypoint 1 we're going to set as the Saratoga VOR, so that is north 27, 24.4, 27, 24.4, we'll insert that, and west 082, 33.8, and again we can hit insert. Waypoint number 2 is waypoint Palms, so that's north 25, 55.4, insert, and west 081, 30.6. Waypoint 3 is waypoint Privy, north 25, 53.3, and west 081, 10.3. Waypoint 4 is waypoint Koofs, north 25, 52.3, and west 081, 00.6. And waypoint number 5 is the Delta Hotel Papa VOR, which is north 25, 48.0, and west 080, 20.9. So we now have all of our waypoints pre-programmed. We'll just come back onto the status page. Obviously in reality we've been much more diligent there at checking the waypoints, but just saving a little bit of time for the video. Ideally here I'd really like to brief off the clipboard. Again, the integration is actually very good when it works, but I have had a few bugs there. I don't want to chance it, so we'll just brief today all the flight off the paper charts. As we've already briefly discussed, we're going to be flying the Lightning 3 departure here today out of Tampa. That is plate 20-3 Echo. It's a conventional SID based off radar vectors. We're departing off runway 19 right, so it's going to be a departure heading of 203. Again, we've already briefed that. So up through 500 feet, we'll turn right here onto heading of 203. We'll maintain the heading until we get our radar vectors. Initially climbing up to an altitude of 6,000 feet, expecting further clearance within 10 minutes after departure. So overall a pretty straightforward departure here. Once we're established on that heading, we'll vector ourselves inbound towards Saratoga. Other notes worthy of mention on the chart: the aerodrome elevation 26 feet, we're basically down at sea level, transition altitude 18,000, pretty standard here in the States. Radar required, and it is a turbojet only departure. In terms of terrain, nil significant. The MSA for the departure 2,700 feet, we're heading out over the water. Weather-wise, as you've seen, it's a beautiful day here on the western coast of the Florida Panhandle. Lastly, in terms of the taxi, again we're currently on stand 74, we're going to be pushing back here into the apron, we'll then taxi out via Victor 3 onto Whiskey, and then head down Whiskey all the way down to Whiskey 8 for a full-length departure here off runway 19 right. Anyway, that's about it for now in terms of the setup. Obviously, with this being a freighter aircraft, technically no passenger cabin for us to look at here today. We'll just continue on though with our hypothetical boarding, and I'll come back to you again once we're ready for the push and start.
I can do the briefing mode. If emergency spotting malfunctions, fire bell ring silencer. So if a serious malfunction occurs before.
Okay, so we have now completed the last of our preparations. The doors are closed up, everybody is now on board the jet. We've also had our flight engineer hypothetically run through a couple more of our before start items. So for the before start checks, the galley power has been selected off, same as well for the AC packs. Lead air is set through to open. We do have above 20 psi here for the start. We'll take the beacon light on. Transponder can go into the on position for the time being. In terms of the start sequence itself, I believe we're going to be starting the number 3 first, then number 1, and finally number 2. And I believe as well we can't start number 1 or 2 here till we've completed the push. So I'll take the part brake off. And we have commenced the push, so we'll start number 3 up to the engine start panel. We'll set number 3 through to ground.
Again, 777-1140 at tree, runway 1 right, clear for takeoff.
There's our N2 rotation. We'll just wait here until we're up through 25% on the N2 before we introduce the fuel. And the flight engineer here today is going to be taking care of the oil pressures. Keeping an eye on those for us. Just up through 20%. And there's 25, so the number 3 start lever will set through to idle. Good light off. We do have a positive fuel flow there as well, just keeping an eye here on the EGT. And we have N1 rotation there as well. We are now good in terms of the push. So we'll set the part brake.
Fox 777, contact departure, have a super awesome day.
You too, sir. Thank you. 777. Take care.
And looks like we have a good start there on number 2, just waiting for that to stabilise. And we do have starter cutout, so starting number 1. Again, setting that through to ground. There goes the tug. And again, N2 rotation. The oil pressure warning light's extinguished.
2-3 Spark, do not fly from the tower, clear the Bravo airspace, use the parallels, altimeter tree 001.
And there's our 25%, so the number 1 start lever set through to idle. Good light off.
Tower, hello United, 2357 inbound, 1 left.
And looks here as well like we're going to have a good start on the number 1. For the start here of engine number 2, we'll head outside so that you can listen to the external sounds of the jet during the startup sequence. And once we have 3 good starts, we'll return again to the flight deck, initially running through some further items here at the Flight Engineer Station. Okay, so we do now have 3 good starts, and as you can see in terms of our oil quantities, temperatures and pressures, everything looking good there for all 3 engines. In terms of the first after start item here at the Flight Engineers panel, rather interestingly we actually need to sync up the frequency here of all 3 generator outputs before we can bring them onto the bus. Unlike a modern aircraft with an IDG, you'll notice that if we come across here to Gen 1, showing just below 400 cycles, Gen 2 a little bit lower, and Gen 3 just above. So again, we need to sync all of those up before we can bring those gens onto the bus. That's a really nice feature. I don't think I've seen that on any add-on before. It may be that there are add-ons that do it, but I haven't come across that personally. So we'll use Gen 3 as a reference, but just to make our life a little bit easier, we'll bring that back towards 400 cycles. And Gen 2, we'll just increase that as well up to 400, and of course the same here for Gen 1. So all 3 generators are now in sync. We'll bring those onto the bus. There's Gen 3, Gen 2, and Gen 1. For the AC meter, leaving that on Gen 3, the output does look good. So for the essential power now, we'll select that through to generator 3 here as well. For the galley power, we'll take that on once again for zone 1 and 2, 3 and 4. For the remaining hydraulic pumps, we'll select elect B on here as well. And for the remaining fuel boost pumps, we'll take the forward left, forward on the centre, and both aft pumps there on the centre as well, and finally the aft pump here on the right. For the hydraulic system test, we'll deselect engine 1 hydraulic pump. We're looking there for between 28 and 3100 psi, which we have.
36 rudder color mile, so if it's Tampa, see for you.
Deselecting the engine 2 pump there as well, you can see that the hydraulic pressure is now falling. Expecting to see that. And selecting the engine 1 pump on there again. The pressure needle there, as you can see, coming up pretty rapidly. And again, we have both engine 1 and 2 hydraulic pumps selected on. Ground equipment has been removed for the doors, just the APU door left to go, just carrying out a lights test. As you can see, all doors are closed and locked. Fuel heats are not required. The hydraulic system B pumps are both selected on, pressures look good. The engine 2 bleed, as well as the APU bleed, we'll select both of those off. And the AC packs can now go on. The flight ground switcher on the pressurization panel, we'll select that through to flight. And lastly, for the APU master, we can now select that off. So a good start there. All of our items are now complete down at the engineer station. We'll head back to the captain's seat and get the jet ready for the taxi. Okay, so we're now back in the left seat. We're going to be stationed here for the remainder of the flight until we have the jet back on the ground in Miami. For the after start items here up the front, in terms of the flaps, we'll set those through to our takeoff position. So flaps 5 selected. The flaps do run out pretty quickly. I don't know how true to life or not that is of the jet. Just waiting here as well till we see leading edge flap extension.
And 56 negative, they have it. You need to go down there.
And there's our green light. In terms of the wing and engine anti-ice, not required. The pitot heats are selected on. For the trim, again we have 3.25 units. For the flight controls, we have full up, full down, and neutral.
Tampa Tower, easily.
Full left,
Take light turn.
full right, and neutral, and on the rudder, full left, full right, and neutral. The engine instruments are checked, EPA bugs are set. Ahead of the taxi, we'll take the taxi lights on. Same here as well for the runway turn-offs. And lastly, in terms of the taxi checklist then, the flaps, we have flaps 5 selected and indicated, and again, we did predicate our takeoff performance data off runway 19 right, flaps 5. Lastly, just checking as well, we do have our green light. The takeoff data again, runway 19 right, airspeed bugs are set, EPA bugs are set. Stab trim we have 3.25 units, that is checked. PTA heats are set. Flight controls have been checked, yaw dampers are on and guarded. And seatbelt and shoulder harness is secure. For the engineer, air conditioning panel is set. Galley power is on, fuel heats not required. Auto pack trip switch is now set through to normal. And lastly as well, seatbelt and shoulder harness for the flight engineer are secure. So checklist is complete. We are clear here on the right. The park brake can come off. And clear here as well on the left.
American 2321, Tampa Tower, only one left on point.
So just coming up on the throttles. We're going to make a left turn here out of the apron. And again, joining 45-degree offset onto Victor 3. Right on Victor 3, then Whiskey all the way down to holding point Whiskey 8 for a full-length departure off runway 19 right.
That's 2387, turn right, kind of ground 17. American 2321, wind calm, runway 1 left, let's take off. Let's take up 1 left. And Eagle 8, you can see the westbound south of the parallel. South of the parallel, please. 316.55, wind calm, runway 1 left for takeoff. 1 left, American 2116, wind calm, runway 1 left for the land.
For the land, 1 left, American 25.
And Eagle 8, remain west of parallel.
And west parallel, hold on, take that. Yeah, so 208, 10 out, ILS 1.
208, 10 down, wind calm, runway 1 left for the land.
Okay, so we are now lined up here on runway 19 right. We'll just carry out the before takeoff checklist here ahead of the departure. So for the before takeoff items, it's 30 degrees currently on the OAT. Icing is not a consideration. The cabin crew have been advised. Ignition is selected on. Anti-skid is on and guarded. For the strobe lights, those are selected on, same as well for the landing lights. Transponder is set through to out. On the flight engineers panel, the APU light is out, booster pumps and crossfeeds are set, the oil cooler is checked, and that is the before takeoff checklist complete. So we'll take the park brake off, initially coming through to 1.4 here on the EPAs. We'll allow the engines to stabilise. And take off. So advancing the throttles now all the way through to 1.98 on the EPAs. That's our takeoff power setting. And thrust is set. Airspeed's live. That's checked. You'll notice the 727 chews through quite a bit of runway here during the takeoff run. I think that's to be expected. The aircraft also feels pretty good on the rudders, which is nice to see. Okay, back on the yoke. The aircraft is initially pretty heavy in pitch. You do need a lot of positive input here on the yoke to get the nose up. And we do have positive climb, we'll bring up the gear. So pitching for 15 degrees nose up initially, we'll just maintain runway heading here till we're up through 500 feet. And there's 500, so we'll start a shallow right hand turn now onto a heading of 203, outbound from Tampa. So just following the lateral flight director bar. And nicely established here on the flight director pitch bar. Up through 1500 feet, so we'll come back now to our climb power setting. That is 1.85 here on the EPAs. So climb power is set, we'll get the aircraft's nose down, we'll go for around 10 degrees now on the pitch. We just want to reduce our climb rate, allowing the aircraft to accelerate. We'll just wait here until we've got a vertical speed of around plus 1000 and then we'll take the autopilot. So nicely established on the heading, vertical speed looks good, we'll engage the autopilot, we can arm up the altitude and we'll take heading select. As you can see, we are now accelerating, the speed is checked, we'll come through to flaps 2.
Air 1655, contact departure. Air 1655.
And just coming up through 3,000 feet. There's 200 knots, again the speed looks good, we can retract the flaps. We'll take the taxi light off, and same here as well for the runway turn-offs. Landing gear lever can go back into the off position. We can get the click spot. So approaching 250 knots, ordinarily we'd come into IAS hold once we reach 250 knots, but we don't want to overshoot the climb here at 6,000, so we'll just reduce the thrust here as we approach 250 knots. 1,500 feet per minute is looking pretty good in terms of our rate of climb. In terms of the after takeoff checklist then, the gear is up, lights are out, flaps are up. Auto brake is disarmed, ignition is off and guarded. Runway turn-off lights are off, the taxi lights are off, auto pack trip switch is selected back through to cutouts. And holding nicely here at 250 knots. You can see we are picking up the Saratoga VOR, that's on a bearing there of about 180. We'll assume now we are being radar vectored inbound, so we'll set 180 here on the heading. And we can set the same here as well on the course. Okay, there's 1,000 to go.
Altitude rate, traffic still block 4 miles, helicopter orbiting 400 feet.
And showing about 24 miles to the VOR, 23 miles there on the INS, so that's a good gross error check.
Look like altitude rate.
We'll bring ourselves now into INS navigation, so we'll go waypoint change, 0 to 1, we'll insert that, and that's essentially a direct 2, so that's 22 miles to run now towards the station. We'll come into auxiliary nav, that'll take us directly towards Saratoga. Speed's still good, just about to approach 6,000 feet, we'll level off momentarily. As you can see, tracking nicely here down the western coast of the Florida Panhandle. Rather a flat area, but a certainly very beautiful day in terms of the weather. So approaching 250 knots, coming back off the thrust to maintain the speed.
Tampa Tower, Beach November 843, echoes 8.5 mile, final 1 right.
And it's a very nice day here, so we'll just cycle the signs here for the cam crew.
943, Echo Tampa Tower, wind calm, runway 1 right, clear to land.
We'll assume now that we've been given further climb up to our cruise flight level, which again is only flight level 230. So there's 230.
Flight land 1 right, 43, echo.
We can arm that up. And this time we will come into IS hold. And just slowly start advancing the thrust levers. Of course, as the thrust picks up, so too will the speed, and the aircraft pitching the nose up here to maintain the speed. So back up to 1.85 here on the EPAs. Thrust is set. And holding the QNH and the landing lights till we're up through 10,000 feet, 18,000 feet for the QNH. Now maintaining 250 knots here as well. The climb checklist then, the autopilot is engaged. On the FMA there we've got out select, we are now tracking in auxiliary nav. Climb thrust is set, engine parameters look good, the pack cooling doors will be taken care of by the flight engineer, and that is actually an automatic process. You can select that as an option with the aircraft to have the flight engineer manage things such as the pack bay cooling doors and various other aspects of the onboard systems, which is a really nice feature actually. So just waiting here till we come up through 10,000 feet, another 1,000 foot to go. Again, we'll take the landing lights off and accelerate up towards 300 knots once we come through 10,000. We'll set the speed bug here ahead of time. One thing I have noticed, unfortunately the speed index here doesn't seem to work correctly currently. It says 10,000. We'll take the landing lights off. We'll take the signs off here as well. And pretty old school flight, so we'll take the no smoking signs off. We'll come back into vertical speed. And we'll pitch the nose down again. Once more, just allowing the aircraft to accelerate up towards 300 knots. So we'll just target that vertical speed again of VS plus 1000. And as soon as we see 300 knots now on the airspeed indicator, we'll come back into IES hold.
Solid 280, that traffic now, 12 o'clock in a mile, 300 feet orbiting helicopter.
So once again, the landing lights are off, fasten seatbelt signs are off, just the QNH now to come. And now 20 degrees on the OT. We're going to be good here in terms of icing today, just very light cloud coverage. I'm not sure we're even going to hit that at our cruise flight level of 230.
Takeoff morning southwest 1003. We are visual, one left.
So just approaching our target speed now. And there's 300 knots, so back into IS hold again.
43 Echo traffic, still back there.
43 Echo.
Once more, we'll keep that until we get up into the later flight levels. So around flight level 210, we'll probably come back into vertical speed. Just shallow up our climb. Make sure that the aircraft doesn't overshoot the target altitude. I wouldn't necessarily even say that's a fault of the product. I suspect that these sorts of vintage autopilots are pretty bad in terms of capture and accuracy, so I think best that you would VS the aircraft up the last 1,000 feet or so. And even on a modern jet under various circumstances, that's still good practice to do, even today. So it looks like we're just coming over the VOR, 3 miles to run there according to the VOR DME. And according to the INS there, we have just passed over the station, 106 miles now towards the next waypoint. Waypoint 2 is Waypoint Palms. That's actually the start of the arrival into Miami, but we'll deal with that later on. We'll brief that up once we've got ourselves up into the cruise. Nice high rate of climb from the aircraft so far. We're doing about 2,500 feet per minute. And again, just holding out till 18,000 feet. So we've got about another 2,500 feet here before we come on to the standard pressure setting for our altimeters. Coming back over the water now, so inland again over the western coast of Florida. You can see there the coastline extending out at our 1 o'clock. And about another minute here in the climb now till we switch over to the standard pressure setting. In terms of our track on the next leg, we're looking at 147. So we'll set that here on the course bar.
So 2706, traffic 5 mile final, runway 1 left, line up and wait.
And we've got 147. It seems as though the INS doesn't actually drive the course bar. That was the case in the FlightSim 727, and indeed various other INS powered aircraft that I've flown over the years, so I don't know whether or not that logic is true to life of the real world 727, or just a little bit of a limitation here in the sim of the FSS 727. Anyway, just approaching 18,000, so we'll come on to 2992. Here on the primary altimeter, we'll do the same on the standby. And lastly here as well, we'll do the same on the first officer side. Unfortunately, there's no option to have the altimeters synced up currently, which of course is less realistic, but it is a nice feature to have. We've got 2992 there on the right, and just coming up through flight level 190, that's checked on all 3 altimeters. So that's our climb checklist complete. Just coming up on flight level 200 now, only another 3,000 foot here till our top of climb. It is a pretty short run down towards Miami, only about an hour in terms of our flight time. Again, tracking now towards Waypoint Palms, which is going to be the start of the arrival. As usual, we'll take the opportunity to briefly head outside the aircraft, take a little bit more of a look here at the external modelling as we make our way down the west coast of the Florida Panhandle. And I'll come back to you again just before our top descent, which at the moment is calculated to be around 20 nautical miles before the Palms waypoint.
Service 1577, descend to maintain 6,000.
Maintain 6,000. Yes, Lima Victor, Victor. Can I say direct to a number?
No, you're number 2. Traffic follow on a 10 mile final to 737. Allow 021 heavy Miami approach. Welcome, expect the ILS runway 10 left. Southwest 102, reduce speed to 170, contact tower 119.3. Lima Victor, Kilo India Victor, traffic to follow 11 o'clock 5 miles eastbound 737, 2,500. Lima Victor, Kilo India Victor, just verify the call sign and you can proceed inbound, follow that traffic, caution wake turbulence.
Okay, traffic inside now, Victor, Kilo India Victor, following the traffic.
Allegiant 236 at Hollis, cleared ILS runway 10 left approach.
At Hollis, clear the ILS 10 left, Allegiant 236.
Allegiant 236, reduce speed to 210.
Slow to 210, Allegiant 236.
So welcome back to the flight deck of the FSS 727. We are now maintaining flight level 230, 300 knots, and we've currently got the auto throttle in here doing most of the work during the cruise. It is worth noting the auto throttle is an optional extra. You can deselect that should you so wish via the clipboard. We are now approaching 20 miles from waypoint Palms, waypoint 2 here in the INS, and as we said, that's a good point to start here our descent. So we'll take altitude hold off here on the flight director. We'll take the auto throttle out here as well, and we'll descend down initially to flight level 110. We can arm that up, and we'll come back on the throttles into IAS hold. The jet just wanting to climb a little bit there initially, and now going into the descent. We'll aim for around 3,000 beat per minute here initially during the descent. So just adjusting the throttles accordingly there for the descent rate. Once we come overhead waypoint Palms, we're going to be tracking inbound towards the Delta Hotel Papa, the Dolphin VOR. That's going to be on a course of 101, so we'll just set that ahead of time. We've got 101 there on the course. And we've already got Delta Hotel Papa tuned up there on standby for nav 1 and nav 2, so we'll switch those across. And you can see there currently we are picking up the station, showing about 73 miles to run towards the airfield. Palms, as we mentioned earlier on, is the start of the arrival into Miami, so we'll brief up the arrival and then we'll get the aircraft set up. So from waypoint Palms, again tracking 101 inbound towards the field, initially over waypoint Privy, then on towards waypoint Koofs, and ultimately on towards the Dolphin VOR, which, I could be wrong, I assume that's a little bit of a homage to the football team, if I'm not wrong. Anyway, from there, expecting to pick up the ILS-08 right, so for the arrival itself, it's the Palms 2 arrival, that is plate 10-2 Juliet. It's a conventional star. Onto the ILS thereafter, that is plate 11-2 for the ILS-08 right. The frequency 110.3, we'll tune that up on standby in just a moment's time. Final approach course 092, we'll set that up later on. We're going down to the Cat 1 MDA today of 450 feet. We've already got that pre-selected there on the altimeter bug, and that's going to be 442 feet on the rad out. Again, we've already selected that, as you can see. In terms of the missed approach, if we need that, it's climbing to 800 feet initially, then a climb left turn up to 3,000, ultimately heading out towards the north to take up the hold. Transition altitude, 18,000 feet. We're just coming through that now, so we'll set the altimeters once we've finished the brief. In terms of the terrain, nothing significant for us there. The MSA, high sector MSA for us, 2,900 feet. Weather, it is, once again, a very nice day in Miami. The wind is straight down the runway, 080 at 4 knots. Temperature on the ground is 30 degrees. And the QNH 2974, so we'll set that here now on all three altimeters.
Allegiant 236, reduce speed to 210.
Slow to 210, Allegiant 236.
We've got 2974 on my altimeter, just coming over now, waypoint Palms, and tracking out towards the east.
Fairwing 1577, reduce speed to 210. Plus 210, 350.
There's 2974 on the standby, and once again we'll do the same here on the first officer side.
Lima Victor, Kilo India Victor, contact tower 119.3, let them know you have that traffic in sight.
And we've got 2974 there on the right. So just coming down through flight level 160. That means we need about 64 miles to run, currently showing 62. We're just getting a little bit high, so just coming slightly back further off the thrust. We'll level off at 11,000 initially, and then decelerate back towards 250 knots. In terms of the landing, once again landing on 08 right, so we'll be vacating off to the right. Probably coming off at Mike 7 or Mike 9, ultimately taxiing in, expecting to stand Delta 25 at the moment. To do that, we'll use auto brake medium, so we'll set that here now. It'll be manual spoilers and idle reverse. Our alternate for the flight today is Orlando. We need 4.5 tons metric for that. And currently we've got about £7,000 there in each tank, so £21,000 on board the jet. That's about 10 tons metric, very roughly. So expecting to land here at the moment with about an extra 5 tons or thereabouts. That's going to be over an hour's worth of extra fuel, so plenty of fuel. I planned on about an hour. Seems we've underburned slightly, but we weren't on the ground for very long in Tampa, so that is potentially quite plausible. Again, though, plenty of fuel if we need to make a missed approach or divert to Orlando. That's about it then in terms of the briefing. In terms of the setup, once again, the frequency for the ILS 110.3, we'll tune that up here on the standby.
Allow 021 heavy, descend and maintain 6,000.
6,000, 021 heavy.
110.3 there on the left.
Spring 1577, cross solid at or above 5,000, cleared LS runway 10 left approach.
And same here as well on the right. We'll set the course later on, we'll track 101 inbound for now. And just coming down through 12,000 feet. So 48 miles is what we need, showing 51 now, looking pretty good now in terms of our vertical profile.
Cross solid at or above 5,000, through the ILS 10 left turbine, 1577.
And just approaching 1,000 feet to go. Approaching 10, we'll get the landing lights on a little bit early, and we'll just hold the thrust. Once we level off, we'll let that speed bleed back towards 250 knots. We'll pre-select that ahead of time. In terms of our descent checks then, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure. We'll take the signs on once again. Anti-ice not required, brake pressures have been checked. The arrival briefing is complete, altimeters are set and cross-checked. Landing data, EPA and airspeed bugs, we'll take care of those in just a moment. You can see the speed is now rolling back. So for the landing data, currently showing a gross weight of 72 tons. We're planning on landing around 70.5 tons. So obviously a slightly conservative figure for us there. And the wind not quite correct here as well at the moment. So again, we've got a bit of a headwind, that's not giving us a headwind, so a conservative figure for us overall. In terms of our VREF approach then, 137, 142 here for the approach. So we'll set the speed bugs, and for the EPA bugs there it's going to be 2.01 for the go around. We'll set those later on. Just approaching 250 knots. So bugs are set for the flight engineer, harness secure, fuel panel was checked, hydraulic pumps are on, cabin altitude is checked, circuit breakers are in. That is the descent and approach checklist complete. Just coming back through 250 knots, we'll descend now down to 3,000. We'll come back into IES hold. And down through 10, speed is good. So the approach checklist is complete. 11,000 feet, we need 44 miles, 41. Again, just getting a little bit high, so we'll come further back off the thrust and continue our approach in towards Miami.
Aztec World 1032, you can proceed inbound for runway 1, or actually, Aztec World 1032, make one left 360, just vectors for sequence. Aztec World 1032, actually, you can disregard, just proceed inbound, keep the speed up for runway 10 left. Allegiant 236, reduce speed to 170.
Slow to 170, Allegiant 236.
Allow 021 heavy, reduce speed to 210.
Okay, so we're just coming down through 5,000 feet, 4,500 now. We've got about another 24 miles to run. And just coming back into VS, just shallowing up the profile. Reducing the power here as well, bleeding the speed off now back towards 180 knots. Here comes the localizer. We'll just adjust again on the heading. Try and shallow up the intercept. And we'll come into nav loc. Looks like we have loc capture there on the FMA. So we'll slew the heading bug round now onto our course of 092. 4,000 feet, 20 miles to run. Still a touch low, but the speed's still coming back. There's the gear warning horn, so we'll just bring the throttle slightly forward of that. And showing nice and low here on the glide currently. We'll reduce that vertical speed a little bit further.
American 987, R92 Jumbo, runway 8 right, quick takeoff.
RTX Jumbo, clear takeoff, 8 right.
So there's 1,000 to go. Once the speed comes back through 200 knots, we can start configuring. We'll take flaps 5 initially. We do have VOR loc capture, so we'll come into auto glide slope. And we are showing glide slope armed. And visual now with the runway out to star 12 o'clock. So everything looking pretty nice here at the moment. Speed just coming back on 200 knots.
8 left, clear to land, ATPL 353 heavy.
Just reducing that vertical speed, trying to avoid levelling the jet off and dragging ourselves in. There's 200, speed's checked, we'll go flaps 2 initially. And 17 miles now to run.
1293, contact departure after approach.
So there's flaps 2, we do have our green light, we'll come through to flaps 5. And now just increasing the thrust again to maintain 180 knots. We'll hold that until around 7 miles.
You1 American 1125, good departure.
So we'll keep flaps 5 for now. We'll take the gear down around 8 miles, and ultimately it's going to be a flaps 30 landing here as per our landing performance calculation. Just again to check those V speeds, so it's going to be a V approach 141. Just set those again, and the EPA bugs, it's 2.0 now on the EPA. And just a little bit more thrust here for the speed.
American 987, contact departure, have a good flight, yeah.
So nicely established here on the loc, just waiting on the glide, just showing 1 dot low currently.
Departure American 987, take care.
And of course, once we capture the glide, just reducing the thrust again to maintain the speed. The missed approach altitude we said was 3,000 feet, so that's already pre-selected.
Bearing 35490, are you ready?
I need about another minute, sir.
Roger, that's on the winner.
Here comes the glide slope. And we do have glide slope capture. And the aircraft now descending on the glide, so working quite nicely there. There are quite a few issues with the automation. I think we'll just cover those off during the conclusion section of the video. For now, just focusing on the approach.
Yeah, we're about to back select at 41, visual 8 left.
So once more, landing on 08 right, we'll be vacating off to the right. As I said, it'll be either off on Mike 7 or Mike 9. Very short taxi for us, basically straight in towards Concourse D. And just as a reminder to myself, again, we've got auto brake, so auto brake medium, but it'll be manual spoilers and idle reverse. Approaching 10 miles now, just coming down through 3,000. A little bit low there on the altitude versus what I'd expect there at 10 miles. Might just be a slight QNH error within the sim. And again, just waiting on 8 here till we take the gear. Right out just coming in there as well, 2,500 feet. That does check against the altimeter, so the altimeter presumably is correct. As we know from the sim, the ILS system in the sim is often not particularly brilliant. Just back off the thrust again, picking up a little bit of speed. Those 8 miles will take the gear down. And actually, now that I think about it, I think you can arm up the spoilers here on the 7.2, but we'll hold off on doing that now. We're on the latter stages of the approach. We'll just go manual spoilers. Back towards 160 now then on the speed. We do have gear down 3 greens. All the way back through to idle thrust momentarily. We'll come through now to flaps 15.
UPS 353, heavy turn left at kilo 9, taxi at kilo to the right, monitor down 1.8.
And speed looking good, we'll come through to flaps 30. Here for the landing. We'll maintain 160 knots here till 5 miles, so just for another mile or so.
American 354, contact departure, have a good day.
Large American 354, heading.
And bringing the speed back now towards the approach. With the landing checks then, gear is down 3 greens, flaps are set 30 with green light. Ignition is on, and the rest there taken care of by the engineer. That is the landing check is complete. Just coming through 1,000 feet.
FedEx 5501 Heavy Miami Tower cross, runway 8 left, runway 8 right, for takeoff, RNAV to follow.
And just coming onto our V approach target.
Cross runway 8 left, clear for takeoff, 8 right, RNAV follow, FedEx 5501.
We'll take the flight director off and take the autopilot out.
FedEx jet 41, turn at 1 at kilo 7 at April, taxi at kilo, monitor down 1.8.
Let's check to 500. We'll continue. So speed looking good. Looking good here as well on the glides.
5501 heavy contact departure, have a good day.
Rather beautiful with the city off there in the distance.
FedEx 5501 heavy, good day.
Just a little bit more thrust. Can't see a pappy here, but we'll just follow the glide, and obviously we can visually fly the approach here as well. A little bit difficult to see the touchdown zone here as well. Things looking rather washed out. Okay, off the thrust. As always in the sim, a little bit of a long landing. So we'll take full reverse, bring up the spoilers, and just derotating the nose wheel here onto the runway. No point jamming on the brakes here to vacate at our planned exit, so we'll just let the aircraft roll through, let the auto brake do its work. We do have the spoilers up. And full reverse, we'll take the second high-speed exit off on the right. Start manually braking now. And coming back towards idle reverse to vacate. Okay, so just vacating the runway here at Mike 10, we'll turn right onto November. And it will then be, as I said, a very short taxi in towards stand Delta 25. Take the landing lights off. And same here as well for the strobes. We can retract the spoilers. And same here as well for the flaps. The flight engineer, of course, will be taking care of his station, so currently starting up the APU. And switching the pressurization mode selector 3 to ground. Delta 25 I think should just be out to the right of the American 777. We'll take the probe heats off. And once we've got ourselves straightened up, we'll take the ignition off here as well. So Delta 22 here off on the left. I think the American there on Delta 24. And again, just getting rid of the ignition. We'll take the taxi and turn-off lights off here as well. And Delta 24. Next one is Delta 25. Auto brake can go back through to disarmed. Onto the brakes. It's all clear on the left. One thing I have noticed with the 727, the nose wheel steering authority seems to be a bit limited. You do actually need a little bit of braking to get around a turn like that, which I don't think would be realistic.
24019 tower, you ready to go?
Anyway, looking good. Inbound towards Delta 25. Looks as though the parking area actually makes another slight left turn there. We'll disregard that. Don't know whether or not that would be accurate.
2401 RNet, number runway 8 right, clear for takeoff.
So, onto the brakes. We'll set the park brake. For the after-landing checks then, speed brake is retracted, flaps are retracted. Probe heats are off. We'll take the window heats off here now as well. Anti-ice is selected off, auto brake is disarmed, transponder. We'll set back through to off, taxi lights are off, landing lights are off, strobes are off. APU is now available, so we can shut down the engines. Might be a little bit tricky here to get to the start levers. We'll just move the throttles up momentarily. So shutting down number 3. Good cut there on the number 3. Do the same on 2.
Miami Tower, Mexali 5224 on our now approaching line.
And finally on the number 1. So we do have 3 good shutdowns. As I said, just to end off the flight, we'll move back once again to the flight engineer's station and finish the last of our parking checks. Okay, so back at the flight engineer's station for one last time for our flight today. As I say, we'll just finish up with the last of our parking checks. So the AC meter is set through to APU. DC meter is set through to battery. Once again, for the pressurization, the switch there set through to ground. The APU has been started, that is now on the bus. The hydraulics ground interconnect switch will set that through to open. Central power is set through to APU. Engine 2 and APU bleed are selected on, so they're now supplying air to the packs. Engine start levers are in the cut-off position, the beacon light is off, anti-ice is off, the signs are off. Fuel boost pumps.
Galaxy 24 Miami Tower, wind 140 at 8, runway 8 left, clear to land.
Power selected off, DC meter is set through to essential TR. Hydraulic system B pumps will leave on, and the galley power as well here will leave on for the turnaround. So that's our checklist complete, and as well our flight complete here on the ground in Miami with the FlightSim Studios Boeing 727 freighter. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the FlightSim Studios Boeing 727-200 freighter. Once again, the add-on was a very pleasant surprise for me overall. The 727 is a pretty accomplished effort. Whilst the add-on certainly isn't perfect, it is an incredibly enjoyable and satisfying aircraft to operate. As usual, we're going to finish up the video here with a breakdown of what I think of the product, starting with the modelling and texturing. Generally speaking, I think the modelling detail is nice, both internally and externally. The aircraft looks the part, the cockpit does feel the part, although it is fair to say there are a few modelling errors in the cockpit in terms of dimensions. Certain things do look off versus the real-world aircraft. Overall, I would say that the modelling is a solid effort, and of course you'll have gotten a feel for that for yourselves during the video. My main gripe with the external texturing of the aircraft is that all of the default included liveries are simply far too clean. With an aircraft of this vintage, you would generally expect to see quite a bit of weathering, quite a bit of wear and tear externally. The cockpit texturing is decent, although a little bit simplistic in some areas. All that being said though, I think that FSS have done a very nice job of making the cockpit feel the part. There are nice details scattered around the cockpit, for example at the flight engineer's station. Nice details actually scattered throughout the aircraft. There is visible cargo down the back. One last point to note on the texturing, and I'm sure you noticed it for yourself, but during the takeoff and at high engine power settings, the associated smoke effects need a drastic overhaul. Of course, you do want to see some smoke coming out of the back of a 727, but at those sorts of quantities, I think you'd be declaring a mayday. With regards to the aircraft's flight model, overall that is definitely a strength of the product. I would go as far as to say this is actually one of the nicer flight models that I've come across in Microsoft Flight Simulator to date. The nosewheel steering did appear to be a bit of an issue to me, quite hard to make any significant turns in the jet. You do need a little bit of braking to tighten up the turn. During the takeoff, the aircraft felt very good in terms of rudder authority, same as well on the yoke, very nice and heavy there during rotation. Initially I thought actually perhaps a bit overly heavy, but I suspect that could well be true to life of the 727. And generally speaking, you do need quite a bit of positive control input to actually fly the jet. The aircraft felt good and trim, nice and stable as well in pitch, easy to set a power setting and a pitch angle and maintain the speed. The same in roll, nice and easy to fly turn, and the aircraft very stable at wings level. The aircraft also felt good during the approach. It was perhaps just slightly more difficult to bleed off speed than I was expecting. Everything felt good as well during the flare and the landing. And overall the 727 is a weighty but very enjoyable aircraft to hand fly, which of course is very important for a jet where you have very basic autopilot modes. As a result, you are probably going to be doing a lot more hand flying. Generally speaking, I also found the aircraft systems depth to be very nice. There was actually a lot more there than I was expecting. Certainly the systems depth is good enough that you feel as though you are operating a 727. And I would say as well there is enough finesse there in the systems that the aircraft does feel somewhat alive. It does feel as though you get appropriate feedback and system responses from your inputs. There doesn't appear to be any failure modes, even in the most basic sense, so for example you can't overtemp or damage the engines. Otherwise though you do get a pretty nice and fleshed out systems model. As we've seen, included with the product is a working INS, which is a really nice touch. Great to see one of those available now within the sim. Overall that did seem to work very nicely. No weather radar included with the product, which is surprising, certainly a little bit of a shame, and it does leave the forward centre pedestal feeling rather empty. I do though, at the moment, unfortunately just have one major concern with the aircraft systems, and as a result the product as a whole. Of course I can only speak to my own experiences, but I've had some pretty significant issues with the autopilot of the 727. Generally speaking, it does seem to work pretty well if you simply fly the aircraft from A to B as intended. But I've been experiencing issues where as soon as I operate the aircraft outside of the norm, so for example any sort of slewing, any sort of replay, the autopilot essentially becomes pretty much unusable. For example, after a replayed flight segment with the jet, I can no longer get heading select to engage. That is obviously a pretty basic and rather important autopilot mode. Similarly, thereafter I was having issues engaging IS hold and even vertical speed modes. So with my experience thus far, if you do just fly the aircraft from A to B exactly as intended, you should be okay with the autopilot. But certainly if you do anything outside of the norm, then do just be aware that you might have some pretty significant automation issues thereafter. The soundset of the 727 definitely one of the product's strengths. Whilst I do think the engine sounds themselves could actually use a little bit more work, particularly during the startup and as well in the flyby, the cockpit sounds themselves, which I'm sure is where most of you are going to be spending the vast majority of your time, all of the little details included with the sound package, the APU startup sounds, the bleed air sounds, the air noise sounds, and as well the engine sounds internally, I think make for a very immersive experience. There is one very noticeable sound loop issue, you probably heard that throughout the video, with the internal cockpit sounds. I know that will probably annoy some of you, personally it doesn't really bother me. So once more, I think the sounds are a very solid effort personally, although of course it would be nice to see some further tweaks. Generally speaking, the product does come with quite a few nice included extras. I think the included onboard clipboard is a really nice touch, it of course fits in very nicely aesthetically with the aircraft. Lots of good features as well included with the clipboard. There is basic SimBrief integration as well Navigraph integration. Again though, unfortunately I personally did experience a few bugs using the chart feature. Nice as well that we get a decent amount of external equipment available with the add-on, so we get chocks, engine covers, external air stairs. You also get rear working air stairs as well as visible onboard cargo. So generally speaking, the 727 a pretty well fleshed out product in that regard overall. A few features that it would be nice to see added. There was no option to display internal pilot models. I think it would really ramp up the immersion if you could have your virtual first officer and as well your virtual flight engineer visible there in the cockpit. You do get the option for some degree of crew automation as well basic crew callouts. Overall a very nice feature. It would be great though to see that fleshed out a little bit further. For example, having the callout feature extend through to your virtual crew as they are running through their virtual checklists. One aspect of the 727 that I do think needs reworking are the default camera views. The camera views included with the product are very zoomed out, it gives a real fisheye effect. And as well, none of the seating positions really seem appropriate for the pilot. Similarly, at the moment there doesn't seem to be any default wing view option, and even if you move yourself manually down into the cabin, all of the windows are blocked off, so at the moment wing views with the add-on are a little bit of a non-starter. So far as the included documentation goes, the FlightSim Studio 727 seems to come with a pretty comprehensive online manual. The information included in the online manual is pretty detailed, you get checklists included, as well as guidance for each phase of the flight. You also get breakdowns on systems information, including how to operate the autopilot, the flight director, and as well the INS. There is also supplementary information included, for example aircraft performance tables, documentation on how to operate the EFB, and as well information included on how to use key bindings, GSX profiles, SimBrief integration, things of that nature. Lastly, touching on the aircraft FPS, I was getting about 37 FPS in the 727 versus around 53 under the same conditions with the default Cessna 152. Anecdotally though, I didn't notice any significant FPS impact with the product. In summary then, the FlightSim Studio's Boeing 727 freighter is generally speaking a very nice effort from the FSS team. In some respects, the visuals of the add-on may look a little bit dated, and there are some aspects of the product that could still use a little bit more polish. However, the aircraft offers up a unique, immersive and very enjoyable experience within the sim, and the product offers up all of the character that you would expect from a vintage trijet. As we've already discussed, the only major stumbling block for me at the moment is the aircraft's autopilot issues. They can rather throw a spanner in the works if you aren't careful. Otherwise, most of the other issues that we mentioned I think are fairly superficial. By Microsoft Flight Simulator standards, the pricing of the add-on is also a little bit suboptimal, given that you are only getting a single variant of the airframe currently. The pricing is roughly on a par with the likes of the Phoenix Airbus family or the PMDG 737-600. However, the FlightSim Studio 727 doesn't currently quite offer the same level of refinement. That being said, the add-on is every bit as much fun to operate within the sim. Certainly, if you enjoyed FlyJSim's 727 previously, or perhaps even Captain Sim's 727 back in the day, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with this rendition of the aircraft. Once again, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it is very much appreciated. To all of you, I hope you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.